Hi, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming here. I know it's been a long conference and sometimes hard to wake up at 8 a.m. here in Vegas, but you all did. And so what I want to do today is to do some question and answer session where you can ask whatever you want. We're going to do it differently than it was done before, which is there are actually going to be, in a few minutes, open microphones here, and you can stand up and ask whatever you want, and maybe I will, maybe I won't answer your question, depending on whether I know the answer or not, even though I can answer questions I don't know the answer to. So I usually do that as well. So just before coming up here, I was wondering whether I should do an Aaron Levy, but I don't have the right, maybe the right shoes, but not the right dress. Or maybe Dan Kaminsky, but I don't have access to the same pharmaceuticals that he does. So not sure I can do that. And very, very hard for me to play the traditional American salesperson, so I don't know if I can tell you. And in the next slide, we're going to, so I'll just be myself. So just before going to question and answer, what I want to do is what usually you expect CTOs to do, which is to talk a little bit about the future and where we think we're going to, without getting into specific details and without worrying whether Lee can actually build it or not. So, you know, you've seen throughout this conference multiple themes. One of them is the platform, right? Network, host, and cloud. I think the other theme you've seen here, and you all know about it because you're all customers or soon to become customers or partners, that we focus on prevention, we don't focus on detection. And I think those two themes are going to drive forward what we do. And really, the way we see security, enterprise security today, is a little bit different than the way we've seen it several years ago, in the sense that for us, the network device that you have in your network does essentially three very simple things. It took us 8 years to build it, but three very simple things when it comes to security. The first thing is to understand the traffic and control it, right? So who's the user, which application they're using, what are they trying to do with the application, is that okay or is that bad? The second thing that our network products do is to apply signatures to the traffic, all kinds of signatures. File signatures to look for incoming executables and PDFs and others that might be bad. Command and control signatures, DNS signatures, URL signatures. We're adding other kind of signatures in the future. And there isn't much innovation going there in terms of the kind of signatures you can apply. It's more about how fast you can apply them, right? And today, you know that our 7050 can apply signatures, depending on the signatures, at 60 gigabit per second worst case. Usually, it will go up to 100 gigabit per second, and all these kind of signatures. And of course, we're planning to have higher-end platforms. We're not going to stop at 100 gig, of course. And we already know how to do it at a terabit, by the way. And we will do it at a terabit at some point. And also, of course, go down, right? Down the chain and also make the existing platforms better. So the second thing that we do after understanding the traffic and applying policies is applying signatures. And I'll talk about signatures in a second. I know there's a lot of talk in the industry about whether signatures work or not. I'll cover that in a second. And then the third thing that our network platform does is to collect information from the network and send it to the cloud for further processing. So what do we collect today? Today, we collect all kinds of files, right? Executables, PDF documents, Office documents, Java archives, and a few other file types. We collect URLs, right? If you're using PanDB, we know every time any of your end users goes to a URL that we've never seen before. URL that you've never seen before, but also URLs that we have never seen before. We collect, in 6.0, we started collecting, it's optional, of course, DNS traffic. We can start collecting DNS replies coming into your network. And we're going to add more and more information that we will be asking you to share with our cloud, such that in return, the cloud can take all that information, process it, find new attacks, very quickly create all kinds of signatures. So file signatures, command and control signatures, DNS signatures, URL signatures, and so on, send them very quickly back to the network, and not just to the device that sent information, but to all the devices that all our customers own for further detection and prevention of attacks, okay? So if you look at where we're going in the future, we want to make the network platform better. And when I say better, from a security perspective, first I mean faster. We want to make the platform much faster than 100 gigabit per second. And then the second thing we want to do is to collect more information from the network and maybe be able to apply new kind of signatures. There aren't that many left. The second thing where you're going to see more and more things coming in the future, and I think a lot of the innovation is going to be there, is what is it that we do with the information in the cloud. So today, we take the files and run them in Wildfire, right? We run them in sandboxes. We take the DNS traffic to try to find more and more bad domain names. In return, send you those domain names such that if any of your endpoints tries to resolve that domain name, we can tell you, hey, that endpoint is running something bad on it. You should probably take a look at it. And we can also block those queries so that the endpoint, the malware on the endpoint cannot connect to the bad guy. We take the URLs that you send to us, and every time we see an unknown URL, a URL we haven't seen before, we go out and we try to classify it. And sometimes when we try to classify it, we find out that that site is actually hosting malware, or that that site is a command and control, part of a command and control infrastructure for malware. So, and there are many more algorithms that we want to add to the cloud to take that information and find more and more attacks, and again, in return, send more signatures to the network to be able to block the bad things at even higher speeds and lower latencies than today. So that's where you're going to see innovation in the future. Now, when you add the host to it, you probably all heard several times in the last couple of days that what Cyvera does on the host is they stop exploits. Okay, I dare you and I challenge you to go and find a single exploit that will bypass their system. It's going to be very, very hard to do that. The other thing we're going to do with the endpoint is we need to be able to stop your users from downloading, whether they want it or not, executables or running executables of USB keys and so on that shouldn't be running. And you're going to see more and more work going to that. And then the last thing that we think that in the future the endpoint will be part of is collecting information from the endpoint, different information than the network, and send it to the cloud. So whereas on the network, you collect information that is more network-related, like DNS information, URLs, files, on the endpoint, you can collect a lot of operating system-related information, like what is actually happening in the operating system, which files are being accessed, open, close, delete, and so on, which sockets are being created, which mutexes are being created, and many other operating system-related stuff. And by sending it to the cloud, not only you can get some forensic analysis, but also you could theoretically use that information together with information that was collected from the network to find even more attacks, and then quickly turn around and generate signatures to both the network and the host so that you can look for these attacks. So I think that what you're going to see on the host is very similar to the network, collecting more and more information, but mostly in the cloud, using that information to find more and more bad things that are happening on your network. And now I promised that I will talk about signatures or signatureless. There's a lot of talk about that in the industry. I think this is, again, the argument of prevention versus detection. You know, there's a big argument in the industry about prevention versus detection, where Palo Alto is pretty much the only company standing out there and saying you need to prevent, whereas most, if not all of our competitors are saying, no, you need to detect and then remediate. And I always ask myself, what do they mean by remediate? Do they actually mean that they're going to go to Russia and bring back the $200 million that were stolen from me when they say remediate? Because we can do that too. I think that the Navy SEALs are for sale, but I'm told that even those guys are afraid of the Russian mafia. So I don't know if that's going to work or not. Or maybe they expect us to go and fix the centrifuges, or maybe we should issue 70 million new credit cards and remediate by that. And you know, when you dig into this, what they're really saying is, we want you to tell us which computer has to be reinstalled. And I'm like, really? You just lost 70 million credit card numbers and you want us to come in and find which computer you need to reinstall? That's not remediation. And we strongly believe that you should not get to a point where your money is in Russia, your intellectual property is in Asia, and that you have to issue 70 million new credit card numbers. Okay, and we're working really hard on getting to a point where you just don't need to do that. Sometimes maybe you have to go and figure out what happened because the attack was successful, but we want to make sure that attacks are not successful, and we're going to work harder and harder and harder to make sure attacks are not successful. Now, here's the issue, especially on the network. The issue is that on the network, the only mechanism that can stop attacks at high speeds and low latency, meaning in real time, is signatures. No other thing that you do can actually, in real time, high speeds, tens of gigabits per second, low latency, sub-millisecond, can stop bad things. So that's why we created this platform where the detection of things is not based on signatures. It's based on sandboxing. It's based on looking at DNS traffic. It's based on URLs and automatic classification. It's based on putting everything into a big database and then asking the database questions. It's based on collecting information from the host to help in the detection of bad things. But once you detect those bad things with things that are not signatures, which things that are more behavioral and more analytic, the only thing you can do with that in order to prevent is to generate signatures. And that's exactly what we do. We use signatures for prevention at the network, and maybe one day it will be appropriate to do that on the host. And we use other things for detection. So when you hear people in the industry or vendors in the industry talk about using non-signature-based approaches and that signatures suck, and yeah, of course they suck, because Symantec takes a week to come up with 60% of the signatures that you need, and they miss 40% of them. Yeah, of course they suck, because some companies out there just don't know how to build signatures anymore. But if you can turn around and build signatures within 30 minutes and deliver it to all your customers, that's great. And that's what we're doing, and we're going to improve that time as well. Okay? So when you hear vendors and other experts out there talking about how signatures suck and you cannot use signatures, what you're really hearing is you need to detect and then call the Navy SEALs to come and remediate. And we just don't subscribe to that approach. We think you need to detect, and for detection, you don't use signatures, use other mechanisms. Sometimes signatures are fine also, and you need to prevent. And the only mechanism known to us and to everyone else that can actually prevent, and by that remediate, is signatures. And that's where we're going to go. And as I explained, we're going to ask you to send to us more and more information, and in return, we're going to send to you more and more signatures, and we're going to send them much quicker and in much higher quality, meaning they'll be able to block more and more bad things. And that's where we believe the future is. And that's where we believe the platform is going to, both on the network and the host, with a lot of emphasis on the cloud, which is doing all that work. Okay? So that's what I had to say. Okay, maybe one more thing. The other thing, which I think Rick hinted to, there's a lot of information in the cloud that is very valuable. Okay? We're missing some information. So for example, when we give you a piece of malware today, when we tell you, Wildfire just found this piece of malware on your network, that's where we basically leave you. And Rick's job and Unit 42 job is to give you more context around it, right? We want to tell you, okay, who sent it, not their name and address and so on, but more what kind of organization sent it, what are they usually going after? Are they going after a specific vertical, which means it's not relevant to you? Are they going after your vertical? Are they going wide? What kind of data do you usually go after? Do they try to delete the data? Are they stealing data? Are they modifying data? How do they usually move inside? How do they usually take the data out? So you can go and look for those things on the network. On top of that, our cloud has a lot of information in it. We have a lot of information in the cloud. If you give us a piece of malware, we can tell you a lot of things about it. Like, for example, what other malware is similar to it? Who else accessed the same URLs and the same DNS that malware accessed? All that information is in the cloud, and one of the things we're working on is to give you a window to that cloud, so you can go and ask those questions. And I think you're going to see that in the future as well. Okay, so that's all I had to say about the future. I know I haven't said much, and I know Lee's not going to build half of it, but at least he'll build half of it, and that will be great. And I think we'll open up for questions now. Do we have the microphones? Yes, we have the microphones. So we have 31 minutes and 8 seconds, according to this clock over here, high-tech, for questions.
Can you hear me? Over here.
Okay.
My name is Mike. I represent the Los Angeles Community College District, the largest community college district in the nation and probably the world. My question to you is, when are we going to have a Palo Alto Academy to combat all these bad guys? When are you guys going to take over the world? Because some other companies already have an academy at our schools, and we won't talk about them, but we're talking about firewall stuff here. We're talking about major incursions. We're talking about safety and peace and all that. When are we going to have a Palo Alto Academy so we can bring up our kids, our college students, to know all this good stuff?
So, is Brett here, by the way? Brett? No? So that's probably a question more appropriate for Brett, who is running our all our service. So the question for those of you who didn't hear is, when are we going to have a Palo Alto Academy? And that's probably a question more appropriate for Brett, who runs all our education, customer support. Excuse me? Yeah, and so the answer is, and without too many details, is we have one, and we're working with about 25 universities, right, or so, on that. And I suggest that we find Brett later and ask him for more details. I'm sorry I don't have the exact answer for that. But I think at the higher level, you're right. I think that a lot of the stuff that we're doing is very, very advanced and sometimes very hard to comprehend, especially if you come from 10 years of working with ports and protocols and working with IPSs and with antiviruses and all the other technology that doesn't detect anything useful anymore. And yeah, it's probably very important that we educate the market in more than a marketing way. And we're working on it. Okay. Question?
Yes. Nir, you've always had a very strong stance against using ICAP in the past.
Once again, it's very hard to hear from here. Can you speak up a little bit?
Okay. You've always had a strong stance against using ICAP in the past, but until we can get ICAP in the Palo, we're always going to have a real proxy to be able to do that, instead of using the Palo as a proxy for data leakage protection, for ICAP response and request mod. Are we ever going to be able to get that in Palo? Because we just can't get away from it in a healthcare environment with what you've got right now for data leakage protection.
Okay, it's very hard to hear anything here. You're asking about ICAP, and when do we plan to?
If you're ever going to.
Or, excuse me? And if we plan to have that? So, we're looking at ICAP a lot, and you're right that there's a lot of legacy equipment out there that requires ICAP. And the problem with ICAP is that it's a very inefficient protocol, and we just cannot figure out a way to make ICAP work at speeds that are faster than a few megabits per second. And we've been trying really hard to work with some of those legacy vendors on finding more efficient ways of getting the data from our devices to their devices. And for some reason, they are reluctant to do that. So we're still trying to convince them. We're still trying to figure out what to do with ICAP. I just think that buying a 7050 and then having 1 megabit of it for inspection is going to be problematic. So.
Hey, Nir. How's it going? 2 questions, actually. So first, do you think with the introduction of this next generation endpoint technology with Cyvera, do you think that this is essentially the death of host-based AV and perhaps even patch management? That's number 1. And number 2, why did you name the company Palo Alto Networks?
Okay. So what did I name? Let's start with the second one. Why did I name the company Palo Alto Networks? It was about 15 minutes before Delaware was closing. Our company, like most companies, is registered in Delaware, and the lawyers really, really needed a name. And I didn't have one, and I was living at Palo Alto at the time. That's where the office was going to be, my basement. And I just said, you know what, Palo Alto Networks, we'll change the name later. And we're working on it. So, yes. So that's the second question. The first question was whether I think that the Cyvera technology is the death of antivirus. I think yes and no. I think the antivirus really died a few years ago with the introduction of exploits. No, I'm kidding. When the biggest antivirus vendors miss 70% of what we find, and even a week later they can't even find still 40% of it, you know that antivirus is dead. But there's probably no better alternative out there right now, or maybe there is a little bit. And yes, I think that the Cyvera technology is going to be probably the last nail in the coffin of antivirus, because I truly believe that the Cyvera technology can stop almost everything that's going against the desktop at the exploit level. What it doesn't do today, and just to be clear, is that it doesn't stop the user from downloading something that they think is useful and is really not, something we used to call in the past Trojan horses. Nobody's using that name anymore, but this is really the only remaining malware, right? I mean, the only remaining malware is Trojan horses once you can stop all the exploits. And I think that there are better technologies than antivirus signatures to look for that. For example, I think that sandboxes are better technologies to look for, to check whether an executable is good or bad. I mean, we're proving it, right? Again, 70% of what we find, they don't. So boxes are certainly better, and the question is, how do you bring the sandbox to the endpoint? And we think we have a way to do that, and we think we're going to do that, and there are other technologies that you can apply on the endpoint that are much better than existing antivirus, okay? We had, it's interesting, we had a customer advisory board, so 10 of our largest customers, I think some of them are here, meeting a few months ago, and it was interesting. There were 10 people in the room, mostly financial services and government, and somehow by coincidence, 5 of them were McAfee customers, and 5 of them were Symantec customers on the endpoint. And all the McAfee customers were complaining about McAfee, about the detection rates and so on, but they heard that Symantec is much better, and they were in the process of switching to Symantec. I'm not talking to you, all the 5 of them. And all the 5 of the Symantec customers, they said that, Symantec doesn't detect things anymore, things are going by, and they heard that McAfee is so much better that they're switching to McAfee. And we've been thinking about going into endpoint security for the last 2 years, but when you hear something like that, you say, okay, the market is ready, okay? So yes, Paul, antivirus is dead.
How do you see endpoint protection fitting into a heavy BYOD environment?
Into heavy what?
BYOD.
I think that endpoint protection is part of it. So first, I think that when we say endpoint protection, we never mean just desktops or just fixed devices. We mean both mobile devices and desktops. I don't think there should be any difference between the way you protect a desktop and the way you protect a mobile device, like a phone or a tablet. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that I think that there are exploits against mobile devices. I think there are exploits against desktops, and both of them should be looked for. I think that, again, there are 2 ways to get on an endpoint, right? The first way is get the user to download and install something, internet, USB, whatever, and the other way is exploit a vulnerability and get something on the endpoint. And I think both of them need to be handled. I think that on the desktop side today, the most common way of getting on the endpoint is exploiting a vulnerability, okay? Most users, hopefully, I think I'm being a little bit too optimistic here, but most users know how to click on executables, or at least you know how to block executables from getting to the endpoint, and then hopefully most users will not stick a USB key, I mean, yeah, really, but into their endpoint and get something on it. So in the case of desktops, the most common way of getting on a desktop is an exploit of a vulnerability. In the mobile world, it's still a little bit different. In the mobile world, most of the bad things are applications, right? You download Angry Birds from the wrong store, and guess what? In the background, it's reading your email and sending it somewhere. So, but that's going to change. I mean, I think that as Google catches up with Apple about being able to tell whether something that they put up there is good or bad, and as customers learn not to go to Play stores in places they're not supposed to go to, and maybe one day Google will block that, we're going to see more and more exploits on the endpoint, and then the technology, such as the one from Cyvera today, will be more and more relevant to the endpoint. Now, their technology, the Cyvera technology, is applicable to any kind of platform, not just desktop. It's also applicable to endpoints, and at the right time, you will have it on your endpoint, okay?
Hello? Oh, okay. This is FYI. Navy SEALs are not afraid of the Russian mafia.
Okay. Sorry for that. I am.
I had a feeling that one might come. My question is basically, how do you feel about end-to-end encryption and the conflict sometimes between visibility and privacy?
End-to-end encryption in what context?
I guess end-to-end encryption in terms of applications and whether applications should be implementing it.
Okay, so what do I think about end-to-end encryption? I think there's going to have to be a balance between end-to-end encryption and the need to inspect traffic, in the sense that, when Skype came out, Skype, of course, is encrypted end-to-end. It's encrypted with a custom encryption protocol, and and they had a lot of anti-reverse engineering mechanisms inside of Skype. So they were working really, really hard on making sure that you cannot figure out the end-to-end encryption of Skype. And also, they were changing it every month. So even if you figure it out, then it was irrelevant a few days after you had something to look into the traffic. And whenever we try to talk to Skype and say, look, your customers are our customers, enterprises want to use Skype, but Skype can be used for anything. You can tunnel whatever application you want through Skype. I mean, I used to say, if you allow your users to use Skype, then just remove the firewall and forget about it, because really, with Skype, everything can go out, everything can come in. Very, very bad application in that sense. And Skype's answer has always been, we don't care about enterprise customers. We just don't care. They want to use it, they use it. If they don't want to use it, they're not going to use it. And I think that vendors that are going to target the enterprises are going to have to be a little bit more conscious of the needs of the security professionals, to inspect traffic and to control what can come into the organization and what doesn't come into the organization. And they will need to work with us in order to do that. Because if they don't, back then when we started, we didn't have a big presence. Today, with more than 16,000 customers, if our customers decide to block an application, then some of these vendors are going to be having some market issues. And I think there are going to be more and more incentives to work with us to make sure that we can inspect the traffic, even if it's encrypted.
You made an interesting integration with Chromium, but now with Cyvera, it's kind of completely different technology, but still in the same space. So do you think you're going to work with them to fight the McAfees and the semantics, or is it more kind of now the both on their own?
Oh, I think we're going to do to McAfee and Symantec what we did to Checkpoint on the network side. It's that simple.
But what about Chromium?
I think we're not going to be the only ones. I think they deserve to go the Checkpoint way.
And with Chromium, you work with them, or?
Excuse me?
With Chromium?
Bromium?
Chromium.
I think Bromium so Bromium certainly has the same aspiration as us, right? To put Symantec and McAfee's endpoint security business out of business. They're doing it in a different way. I think that the way we're doing it, or the way Cyvera is doing it, and in 2 weeks it's going to be us, or 2 weeks or something around that, it's going to be us, is a little bit more applicable to the mass market. I think that the way that Cyvera does that doesn't affect the end user. It works on all platforms, no matter what CPU you have there and how much memory you have in it. It has a very small footprint. The first question I get when I talk to AV professionals, whatever that means, with this is they tell me, whenever we see very high file activity on the machine, the antivirus crumbles, and you don't see that with Cyvera, okay? It's going to be hard for you to get a CPU with Cyvera way up there, and it just works. You put it on desktops and it just works, and I think that that's very different than other solutions in the market. But I think there is also room for other solutions that are a little bit more specific, and I think they're targeting more niche areas of the market and places that require tighter controls and other things that are not applicable to mass market products.
I have a question. With regards to Apple and Cyvera, are you interested in licensing technology to Apple, or working with them to be able to put it in
Licensing
the OS?
technology to whom? To
Apple for
okay.
iOS, or working with them, since they have such a sandbox view on things. How are you going to get Cyvera to protect Apple iOS endpoints?
So again, Cyvera technology is applicable to OS X and applicable to iOS. and we've already seen it working on at least OS X. And whether Apple will want to take it or not, I mean, that's a question to Apple. I mean, I'll be happy if Apple and Microsoft put this on each and every of their desktops, and so that you don't have to install it, right? But you know, it's really up to them. Excuse me?
How will you be able to install it so it works on an iOS device, since Apple won't let you have that low-level access?
Yeah, that's why I said we've seen it working on macOS, on OS X. On iOS, yeah, that will be a question to Apple, right? And you know, we have good relationship with Apple, and we're going to try to convince them to do things like that, and hopefully they will. I think that right now, as I've said before, iOS and even Android are less of a problem, in the sense that on iOS and especially on Android, today the bad things are the malware, right? The applications that the user installs. So it's not about trying to get something on, the best way today to get something installed on a phone or on a tablet is to convince the user that you have a really compelling application, which is much easier than finding a vulnerability and exploiting it. I think that over time that's going to be a bigger issue. The exploits of vulnerabilities on the mobile device are going to be a bigger issue, and hopefully by that time we would have convinced them to work with us.
Yeah. Hi, Nir. My question's about maybe one day getting here. Sorry. Well, that's fine. One day getting the Cyvera on like a consumer endpoint. If you kick, you know, McAfee and Symantec to the curb, maybe having, you know, something that your average Joe Blow with his laptop might be able to get from Best Buy, kind of thing. Like, how do you see the technology you guys are innovating on, maybe participating in the consumer market?
I see. You know, we don't have any consumer aspirations. It might be that some of our service provider customers or service provider partners would be interested in taking that technology and bringing it to their consumers. And you have to remember that Cyvera, the endpoint security solution, is going to be part of a bigger thing. It also includes network, and it includes the cloud. And it's not something that I think is applicable to an individual consumer, but I can certainly see service providers that provide service to consumers, like, for example, AT&T Wi-Fi, AT&T Cellular, Verizon Wireless, and so on. And of course, their domestic and foreign peers, I can certainly see them providing these kind of services, both network services because they see the traffic, endpoint services because they have a relationship, especially on the headset side, with the consumer, and be using our cloud or their cloud to provide the cloud component of it. And we are certainly working with some of them on that.
Up top. So I agree that AV is dead and has been dead for a while, but part of the reason why it's still around is because regulatory compliance agencies require that we have it. What are your thoughts on trying to get those to speed up and recognize new compensating controls like Cyvera?
Yeah, so I think that I have two things to say about that. So it's a general thing about regulations, and specifically, yes, I think that if we aspire to replace someone on long term, on your endpoint or wherever, in the network or whatever, we certainly have to convince the regulator or the auditors that what we do is the right thing to do. So either convince the regulators to change regulation, or you convince the auditor that what you do is at least as good as what the others do and that it falls under regulation. And this is on us. Okay, it's going to be our job to convince the regulators that whatever we do can replace whatever has been there before. Now, that goes to the second part, which is generally regulations. You have to live with them, but to me, regulations have always been a prohibitor for security, okay? Because of two reasons. The first reason is that the regulators cannot catch up quickly enough with reality. Okay, they just can't. And things are moving too fast for them to catch up. And that brings the second problem with regulation, is that very quickly with regulations, you're getting to a point where you're either compliant or secure. Okay, and like PCI, for example, okay? Target was PCI compliant. Okay, I'm sure if they spend the money that they spent on becoming PCI compliant on security, they would have been secure. And I think that maybe one day, the government would be able to either let go and understand that market forces are better than regulations, or maybe they can regulate in a different way, which is regulate the penalties, not the way you are supposed to avoid the penalties, and let enterprises and other organizations spend money on security and not on being compliant. Hopefully it's going to happen one day. We'll see. It's also applicable in other areas where, which is good for us, but today, not in the early days, which is that regulations usually prohibit small companies from being successful, especially in the government space where you need to get certified. Some of these certifications take time to get. And why you don't get them, some government organizations cannot buy those, the products that you come up with. So if you're super innovative and you're super good at detecting bad things or doing whatever, you still have to wait 4 years, or the government has to wait 4 years until it can buy it from you because they have to wait for you to get certified. And by the time you get certified, there's another thing that they actually need to buy, not you. This is good for big companies once you go through that, but it certainly, I think, hurts the organizations that are regulated and need to get compliant products.
Okay, hi. I keep getting into discussions over wildfire versus inline sandboxing like FireEye and other. Do you have any ideas or comments on that?
Yeah, what do you mean by inline sandboxing?
Well, we keep being told that you need sandboxing in your network to be safe and to protect against
oh, you mean on-premise?
Yes.
Versus the cloud?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I can give you my thoughts about that. So first, we have an on-premise WA500 appliance, which is, which gives you the same sandboxing technology, although not updated as often on your premise, and that goes to one advantage of the cloud. If you look at us versus the other sandboxing solutions in the market, I think that especially the ones coming from companies like FireEye, which are standalone companies, I think there are a few differences. The first difference is, and I think that's the biggest difference, is around prevention. Okay? So when they tell you that they found a piece of malware in the network, that's when your problems begin, right? That's when you need to call professional services or incident response, which, hey, by the way, they own also, pay them a lot of money, and they're going to find out how you got screwed and why you just lost $100 million, okay? Whereas if you focus on prevention, meaning you take that malware that you found and very quickly turn into something that can stop it from either communicating to the outside or coming in again and so on, you don't have to go to that. So that's the first difference between us and the firewall helpers, right? And it's not true just for sandboxing, it's also true for other firewall helpers. If you're not the firewall, if you're not in a position to go and stop things, then you're just going to detect them, and you're just going to create yourself problems because you actually have to do something about it, and it's a lot of work and a lot of money, which you probably don't have time for and the money. So that's the biggest difference between us and firewall helpers, like FireEye. I think that the second difference is that when you do it in the cloud versus on-premise, so first I'm hearing rumors that they are saying that it's much faster to do it on-premise than in the cloud. And to that I would say that, as Lee said, it takes 5 to 6 minutes to test something, whether on-premise or in the cloud, and it takes about a second to get it there. So adding a second to 5 or 6 minutes is negligible. On the other end, the capacity of the cloud is much bigger, and I'll talk about capacity in a second. And then the second thing is that in the cloud, we can update the software much more frequently, right? I mean, we can update it about once a month, which you're not going to do on-premise, meaning you're not going to go to your on-premise box and update it every month with the latest algorithms inside the sandbox to go and detect bad things. So in the cloud, you always get the latest technology without having to worry about upgrading your sandboxes 12 times a year. I think that when it comes to capacity, you can assume that the capacity of the cloud is unlimited, meaning whatever you throw at us, we'll handle it. If we can't handle it, we'll just go and put more servers there and more CPU cores and handle it. Recent testing that we've done on FireEye I think we had their mid-range box. Do you know which box we had of them? Anyone? Palo Alto? It's the one that costs about $90,000. I don't remember the model number on it, but it's like very close to the highest end. Do you know how many files they can scan every hour? How many files, executables or PDFs, can they scan in 1 hour on a $90,000 box? That's something they don't tell you. Just anyone wants to guess? Remember, we're scanning in the cloud today 3 every second. Okay? They can scan 55 files an hour. They don't tell you that. A lot of the files that are coming into your network, they don't even scan because they can't do that. They start backing up. So on-premise, you can scan only 55 files an hour, and then you're going to tell me that you're faster than the cloud? We scan 3 every second. Again, 3 every second translates to whatever, 10,000 an hour, right? They do 55 an hour. So that's a big difference. And so you combine that with the fact that we don't just detect, we prevent the attacks if we see them, to the fact that you don't have to deploy us everywhere because your firewalls talk to a central location, whether on-premise or in the cloud. And you combine that with the fact that we update it every month without you having to do anything. I think the cloud is much better than doing it on-premise.
Okay. So on the FireEye note, at work we have I just want to real quick, we have a FireEye box that is routinely backed up. I mean, we'll get an alert about an endpoint being infected like a week later. So you're kind of preaching to the choir on that, but that's not my question. My question is, so you guys have always been the network security company. I think that's even in your marketing tagline. So now you're encroaching into endpoint. So you've got to be able to compete with like the McAfee EPOs out there and the suites of products that affect the endpoint. So my question is, are you going to do? I see that you're doing some malware prevention, which sounds kind of like a Bit9 kind of thing, maybe a little more advanced in that it doesn't affect the user as much. But what are you going to do for like device and endpoint encryption, or are you going to grow? Like I see Global Protect and how it has its local hips to a degree, but like McAfee EPO can learn. Like you can set it in a learning mode where it will learn the traffic on the client. And you can tell it to learn the rule base and then pull it back in EPO and then push it out to 1,000 clients. So
Yeah.
what are your plans with that?
We don't have plans for that right now. Meaning our plans right now is to be the best at preventing your endpoints from being attacked and taken over. And encryption and data leakage prevention on the endpoint and things like that, we're going to leave. I mean, McAfee needs to do something, and Symantec needs to do something. We plan to take away their security business, their AV business, and leave that to them. But you're right. I mean, maybe one day it will be appropriate for us to also do that. But one of the things that we always say is that we don't like to do things the same way others do, because then you can beat us up and make us discount the hell out of the product. We like to do things differently. So, no, I'm kidding. We like to do things differently, okay? It just doesn't make sense to us to do the same thing that other people do. So if the only way we can do it is the same way they do it, we're going to leave them to do that, and we're going to do the things that we know how to do differently. And yeah, if one day we find a way to do disk encryption or any of the other things that they do on the endpoint in a different way, then we might do that. Maybe we'll use the native disk encryption of Mac one day, for example. Yeah. Okay, we're kind of out of time. We're 1 minute and 7 seconds beyond time. So I'm the last speaker. I have no idea what's happening next. I say bye? Okay, bye.